Hi everyone, and welcome to lesson 5 in the series I've been doing on nature poetry from the Educas anthology, and what we're going to be doing today is looking at excerpt from the Prelude by William Wordsworth. Just as a recap, to say that we are looking at nature, and I have had a little bit of a shuffle round with some of the poems, and I think I might have explained this last time, because some of them don't necessarily lend themselves fully to nature. So as you can see there, we've got the poem that we've done already, which is Death of a Naturalist, Hawk Roosting, and we're going to be doing excerpt from the Prelude. We've done Ozymandias already, and the last one that I will be doing will be To Autumn. The Soldier and Mamet's Wood, I will deal with those when I look at the war poetry. Alright, I've just got a little question, or a series of little questions here for you. And it's this idea that walking home in darkness when you know that you shouldn't really do it. So you could be running late, you could be panicking about something, and just that feeling that being in the dark somewhere, does it make you feel different? Does it make you feel a certain way? You know, how did it make you feel? You might have been in the countryside somewhere, and if anyone has ever been in the countryside and it's dark, then it's quite eerie, and your hearing is very, very sensitive to what is around you. And things like, did you maybe hear unfamiliar sounds? Did sounds make you jump, whereas if it was in the daytime, that wouldn't happen? Just have a little think about it, because it has got some significance to what we're going to do today, and the sort of the way that the child who is in the poem might actually feel about nature and about darkness. So again, you can pause me anytime. If you want to pause me now and have a little think about it, then that's fine, but you probably don't need to. You probably just want to get on with it, and you want to just listen to the poem. Okay, so just to say that we are doing the excerpt from the Prelude by William Wordsworth, and we are learning to analyse the poet's use of language and structure, which is AO2, and also I'm going to include in this one contextual influences, which is AO3. I know I've spoken before about the importance of context, and I will reiterate this today, but just really so we don't forget to include that when we're actually writing about the poet's meaning, which of course is language and structure, etc. Okay, so back to our banding. So band 3, you can actually make accurate comments about language and structure using subject terminology. Please feel free to forward me on if you don't want to listen to this again, because this isn't all my PowerPoints. And with context, you can refer to some context, and it's important, so you know a little bit about Wordsworth and why it might have some relevance to the poem. Band 4, I can analyse the use of language and structure using accurate subject terminology, which is AO2 again, and I can be confident about referring to contextual influences in connection with the poem. So almost like threading your way through the poem and understanding where Wordsworth might have got his ideas from. And band 5, right at the top, I can confidently analyse and be perceptive about the use of language and structure using accurate subject terminology, it has to be relevant, and I can make sophisticated connections to contextual references and their significance in relation to the poem. Alright, as always everyone, be prepared. So again, we are doing an excerpt from the Prelude by William Wordsworth. That is on page 21 of the anthology. Get your highlighter or highlighters ready. You may want some paper, but to be honest, this poem is quite short in comparison to some of them we've actually read. But do make sure you've read it first and maybe listen to it, but I will do it during this presentation. And just a reminder there as well, the Educas guide, you know, the actual CGP guide, and I must admit I've not used a lot of ideas this time from this one. Some of them I have, but a lot of them are my own ideas or some research I might have done, because I did do a little bit of Wordsworth when I was doing my degree, and there he is on the right hand side. Right, so as usual I am going to do context with you. But what I want to do is I just want to give you this information. Now, this is completely up to you, and you'll know why I'm doing this in a minute. You can skip ahead if you want to, but just out of interest, I'm going to just give you some information about William Wordsworth. And the thing with this is it may not be relevant to our poem that we are studying. And remember, I always say to you, always choose what is relevant. But at the same time, I don't want to skip this out because it may be of interest to you. Let's have a little look. I did, by the way, get this from lots of different sources. It could well be a PowerPoint that we've used in school. So William Wordsworth then, so 1770 to 1850, is one of the most famous poets in the history of English literature. He was born in the Lake District and his birthplace had a huge influence on his writing. That's really important. So did the fact that his mother died when he was only 8 years old. His father wasn't always around, although William did use his library for reading. Wordsworth is believed to have started writing poetry when he was at school. During this time, he was orphaned by the death of his father. He went to Cambridge University and just before finishing his studies, he set off on a walking tour of Europe, coming into contact with the French Revolution, which informed his writing. He fell in love with a French woman and she had a child. Wordsworth returned to England before his daughter Caroline was born, and war between Britain and France meant that he didn't see his daughter or her mother for many years. In 1802, shortly after visiting his daughter in France, Wordsworth married Mary Hutchinson, a friend from his school days. They had 5 children together. 1812 was a terrible year for them as 2 of their children died. Wordsworth was made Poet Laureate, the Queen's Poet, in 1843. However, in 1847, he was badly affected by another death, that of his daughter, Dora. He was said to be so devastated that he couldn't bring himself to write any more poetry. Just one more thing there, actually, everyone. That Poet Laureate, I have spoken before to you about that. A Poet Laureate is really someone who represents the country. And any events that take place, they tend to write poetry about that particular event. It's not just a poet that belongs to the Queen, just so you understand that. And he died of pleurisy, an illness that affects the lungs, in 1850, aged 80. Not a bad age for that time, for the early 19th century. So, the information I've given you here, some of it will have no relevance whatsoever to the poem that we're studying. And that's why I really wanted that to say that to you, because please don't quote any of this if it's got no bearing on the poem itself. You'll know what I mean in the next slide. Okay, so I have actually chosen now the information that probably is quite important for you here. So William Wordsworth, again, we said that before, is one of the most famous poets in the history of English literature. He was born in the Lake District and his birthplace had a huge influence on his writing. So the idea of nature and the idea of the countryside, anyone who's been to the Lake District will know it's just a beautiful place to go. The lakes, the hills, the mountains, all those beautiful things that you see in connection with nature. He was a poet from the Romantic era and is considered one of its founders. So there you go. We've done Romantic poets before, like Shelley, and it's got the idea that they were all kind of discussing nature and the power of nature, and that's my third bullet point. So Romantics believed in the power and beauty of nature. To them it was sublime, awe-inspiring, but also powerful in a frightening way. We should respect nature. This poem also explores the relationship between humans and nature. This excerpt is taken from an epic poem. This was actually 14 books long, this poem. And it's about memories from his life. And it's autobiographical, of course. And he began writing it in 1798. Now, an excerpt means a section. It's a little bit like extract. He spent most of his life working on the poem, and it was published after his death in 1850. But I'll give you a bit more information on the title in a minute about where it came from. But you can see there that he lived to a grand old age, again, which is early 19th century, not bad, 80 years of age. All right, everyone, so just to remind you about tip and slip, the structure that I use when you come across poems that you've never seen before or poems that you want to annotate yourselves in the anthology. So the idea of title, personal pronouns, positive words and phrases, any negative words and phrases. What's the structure? So things like rhyme, pace, repetition, there are others. Language, so use of language, very, very important. And of course, use of punctuation, which can really come in with the structure of the poem. And again, poems are like jigsaw puzzles. Put these ingredients together and you will get the big picture, the analysis or meaning of the poem. And again, don't forget everyone, you can skip me here because I am saying the same things to you that I've said previously, but some people might just come straight into this PowerPoint or straight into this session without seeing the others before. Alright, let's look at the titles we always do then. It's not an awful lot to say about this one really when we've analysed all the other titles, but this one is more about information. So there on the right hand side you can see that's the book, the autobiographical poem. It did fill 14 books altogether and it is about Wordsworth's life, and again this idea that he was very heavily influenced by nature because he was surrounded by it every day of his life. So it's called Excerpt from the Prelude. So what is the prelude? A prelude is an action or event serving as an introduction to something more important. That's a dictionary definition there. So what was he doing then? The clue is in the title, though this title was given to the poem after his death. I did actually did a bit of research on this. The prelude was written as a prelude or an introduction to The Recluse, the great philosophical poem that Wordsworth, encouraged by Coleridge, dreamed of writing but never completed. So it was a prelude to something else that he was going to write but never actually got to write The Recluse. As always everyone, so just to suss out the meaning of the poem or what's happening in the poem, we always start with trying to find those words and annotate. So pause me here if you want a little go. You should really do this yourselves just to get used to the language that's used in the poem itself. So I'll just go through those words with you. So it's twilight, rapture, exulting, shod, confederate, chase, resounding, bellowing, precipices, tumult. Okay, I am now going to reveal what each one means, but can you make sure that you do underline or circle them in the poem, and you do very briefly right next to each one, if you can fit it in, what each one means, because this will help you when you go to the deeper analysis in the poem. So pause me here if you're still looking through the poem, which I'm sure you will be, and you can start to annotate, find out for yourselves if you want to. If not, I'm going to reveal what each one actually means. Twilight, when the sun is below the horizon and it creates a soft glowing light. Always creates a nice little atmosphere, doesn't it? Depends what type of context that you're reading something in, I suppose. Rapture is intense happiness, pleasure and joy. Exulting is extreme happiness, elation, like lifted on high. Rejoicing, sometimes it's connected with being heavenly, you know, this idea of having faith and really sort of having that extreme rejoicing. Shod is just wearing shoes. Confederate means to be united as a group, so you have a common sense of purpose. You've probably heard of Confederate Army. Chase, so it's just a different spelling for chase, that's all it is, and here it refers to a hunt in the poem itself. Don't forget, this is 19th century, you'll have some words that are spelt differently because language does evolve over time. Also what Wordsworth does, and you probably noticed this, is he actually uses apostrophes for omission. So instead of saying the word, so the word blazed, he actually misses out the E, because if you think, now I'm not saying the 19th century they spoke like this, but definitely in Shakespeare's time they would have pronounced it blazed, or you know, in Romeo and Juliet when the prince says all are punished. So it's that idea of how you speak and how do you get the rhythm in the poem. So Wordsworth actually misses those letters out, so you get the one syllable sound as you read it. The word resounding is loud enough to reverberate. Bellowing is loud voices and shouting. Precipice are steep sides of a cliff or a mountain. And tumult is loud noise, especially one made by a group of people. So you might actually see a little thread going through there, and almost a semantic field in a way, of things that have got something in common with each other. Right, let's look at the poem then. So I'm going to read through it, and again, if you've listened to it, if you've read it, if you're happy with this, then you don't need to listen to me reading it. You can move on to the next slide. Here we go. And in the frosty season, when the sun was set, and visible for many a mile, the cottage windows through the twilight blazed, I heeded not their summons. Happy time. It was indeed for all of us. To me it was a time of rapture, clear and loud. The village clock tolled 6. I wheeled about, proud and exulting like an untired horse that cares not for his home. All shod with steel, we hissed on the polished ice in games, confederate, imitative of the chase and woodland pleasures, the resounding horn, the pack loud bellowing, and the hunted hare. So through the darkness and the cold we flew, and not a voice was idle with the din. Meanwhile the precipices rang aloud, the leafless trees and every icy crag tinkled like iron, while far distant hills into the tumult sent an alien sound of melancholy, not unnoticed, while the stars eastward were sparkling clear, and in the west the orange sky of evening died away. Notice that I did go off on a sort of a tangent before when I talked about the idea of the apostrophe and the idea that he misses those letters out, and you can see it there in the 3rd line when he talks about blazed. You can also see it in the 7th line. Yep, 7th line, told and wheeled, just to give you that rhythm. I'm going to talk about rhythm in a minute and metre of the lines. And you've got there also as well, untied horse, so a horse that's just untied. Okay, that's let loose. So what are we dealing with here? So Wordsworth explores the beauty of nature and the freedom of childhood. This is a third of the way into the first book that he wrote, and a boy is enthralled but then overwhelmed by nature. It begins on a winter's evening. Children are playing, ice skating. It is getting dark and the child doesn't want to go home. Does that sound familiar? Okay, I'm going to start with form and structure this time. I normally start with language, as you know, but I think it's quite important that I tell you about the way that it's set out first before we start to go a little bit deeper, and I will come back to this a bit later on just to consolidate the idea. So it is written in first person. It's a first person narrative. It's very personal, and it shows his childhood memories to be idyllic and yet reflective. So this idea that he was happy as a boy, but he's now reflecting on that. You get that in the Seamus Heaney's poem as well, don't you? Death of a Naturalist. So it's written in blank verse. So as we've discussed before, blank verse is unrhymed, iambic pentameter. Okay, so 10 syllables per line. It shows a respect for nature. So remember, iambic pentameter is mostly written for love poetry, which shows that love for person. So he has got a love for nature, but it also shows that kind of respect for nature as well. It mimics the natural rhythm of speech, and it gives it a sense of realism. One single stanza gives the impression that his feelings are blended and intertwined with each other. So it's almost like that sense of there's enjambment going on as well through the poem, where every line goes into the next one and it goes through and it goes through and it goes through, and everything is together. So all his memories are in that one stanza. It has an unfluctuating structure, so it gives a sense of continuity with the use of enjambment. So I said that before. So the structure more or less stays the same all the way through, which again gives that continuity of his memories, I suppose. But there is one line that does differ, so we will talk about that one. There are 2 main sections to this excerpt. The first focuses on the fun, which is light and carefree. And again, we'll look at the language in a minute to consolidate that idea. Then there's a distinct change when the focus turns to nature, and look out for the volta. Remember, a volta is a turning point in the poem. The tone then becomes more serious, and it shows a greater awareness of nature and its power. So again, we'll come back to this again at the end, but I just wanted to share this with you really. So make a note of it in your anthologies, make a note at the bottom, and at least then you can start to match up and you can start to think, oh yeah, I can see why he put that there. I can see why he structured this the way that he did. Right then, so we're going to analyse the language. So we're going to take it bit by bit. All right, so we're going to start with the word and that actually starts the whole poem off. So the use of the conjunction suggests a continuation as though we've missed something previously. Also, the use of and makes it feel quite energetic and enthusiastic, as though a child is telling a story. So when we talked about this in Death of a Naturalist and we said and, it's almost like they're getting carried away with the story. But this is almost like we've met them in the middle of the action. It's a little bit like in media res, but it's not quite, it's not fully that. It's the fact that maybe we've missed something before. So the idea of it being a frosty season and twilight blazed. So frosty season, it's a wintry scene, but it's happy. In this context, it's actually happy. And quite often we look at these seasons, don't we, in literature, and being frosty and cold, and it always means something more, serious, I suppose. And then the idea of twilight blaze, the setting of the sun, it's that soft glow, it gives a sense of light, warmth and security. So for Wordsworth here as a child, the idea of twilight, the orange sun that was coming down, it really gives that sense of warmth and a nice memory. That's why context is really, really important, and how you read it in something. So here that I noticed as well, there's quite a lot of first person plural. So he does use I, so because it's first person narrative, we know that. It's about a child, so it's quite egocentric. The idea of that person just being about that person, it's about me. And it's a happy time. But he also uses the idea of us as well. The idea that we're all together in this, we're all part of a group of this. So that use of I and me almost suggests that it was even greater for him. So nobody was having such a good time as he was. So you can see there he said, happy time it was indeed for all of us. To me, it was a time of rapture, clear and loud. And again, we'll look at those words in a minute to show that this is how happy he was doing this. Lots of thesauras here. As you can see, I've actually highlighted it in green. So you've got a colon, semicolon. It creates in the poem here, in this particular context, it creates the sense of being breathless and excited, and it reinforces that use of and at the beginning. So when he goes and in the frosty season, and it's almost like he really can't get it out quick enough because the memory is so clear to him, and he was so enthusiastic about this skating on the ice. What a great thing to do. And then again, I've just put here the idea of verbs that are used. So the word wield, so illusion of being something that's being fast. And I've said throughout the actual poem, look out for these other monosyllabic verbs. So one syllable verb to show the increased speed and pace. And again, that E is missing there, isn't it? So it's quite fast the way that you say it, wheeled about. Okay, so look out for those monosyllabic verbs. Remember, mono means one. Okay, so one syllable word. Right, so moving on then, let's have a look at a little bit more of the poem. So here what I've done is I've actually highlighted quite a bit really. So I've highlighted proud, exulting like an untied horse that cares not for his home. Okay, so what does he feel here then? So he feels confident and carefree. He feels elated. So the idea of being exulting and rejoicing in this activity. The use of the simile here, like an untied horse. He compares himself to a horse which is strong and full of energy, and there's no fear of consequences. So this horse that's, I said before about being tired, it's not that. It's a horse that is not tired, that's full of energy and enthusiasm. So he compares himself to that. Doesn't feel he's got any consequences here.